Discover your inner goddess and live up to your highest value and most abundant potential. Welcome to Grateful Goddesses, a podcast that empowers you to unleash your inner goddess and take the leap of faith to live your best life. Your guide, Karen Pulver, joins her fellow goddesses in soulful conversations about gratitude, personal growth, authentic living, and a bevy of topics affecting women today. Let's start the show with your host, Karen Pulver.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today on Grateful Goddesses. So this is being recorded in October 2020, and there's so much still going on in our world, in our lives. And I'm not sure about you, but just when I feel like I've got things under control and I can handle the day, something bombards me. In fact, most recently, a dear friend of ours passed away. And I really, when I'm looking back at him and the last few months, I feel that COVID has really contributed to his feeling of isolation and loneliness. And I can't help but think, what could I have done? But at the same time, I wish that he could have reached out to people, but also to have reflected back on some of the things that he could have done for himself personally, especially during this time. But you know, we all need help with that. And we need to reach out to people to get that feeling of connection. And I'm hoping today, whether you are watching Grateful Goddesses, listening, or reading the blog, that if you are struggling, or even just everyday struggles, every day-to-day things that you're going through, especially during this time, that you will reach out and get help. So our guest today is Leslie Davenport, and she is going to be sharing with us her passions and also to help us deal with this feeling of isolation and loneliness. And in addition to COVID and the pandemic and people just feeling sick, our world is feeling sick. Our earth is feeling sick. And how can we deal with that? How can we help? How can we feel better about helping? What about those conversations that we want to have with people when they are totally thinking that it's all a joke, that it's not real? And we're feeling like, no, this is real and we have to do something about it. Or like my cousins who went through a fire in California, lost their home. And how are they dealing with it afterwards and rebuilding their lives again? So Leslie Davenport is a climate psychology consultant and educator. She's the author of 3 books, including Emotional Resilience in the Era of Climate Change. Her 4th book will be released spring 2021 by Imagination Press and will support middle schoolers in building emotional intelligence and resilience for going into a warming world. She's a founding member of the Institute for Health and Healing, one of the nation's oldest and largest integrative medicine clinics. She currently lives in the Pacific Northwest and is on faculty with the California Institute of Integral Studies. Thank you. Join us, Leslie.
Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be joining you in this conversation.
I'm really happy you're here. I saw you on a webinar back in March, which seems like years ago, when the pandemic hit. We were settled in place. And for me personally, I was having a hard time just understanding that whole concept of that lack of control and isolation. And some of the things that you said, that you suggested, practical things, I actually did. One of them was hanging pictures in my window, and I walked around the neighborhood and gave my neighbors an anonymous letter. I didn't want them to know it was specifically from me. And I just said, hey, everybody, let's just, put happy faces and different things each week. And another actual practical tool that I got from hearing you speak was to have like an hour of anxiety. I don't remember the exact terms, but a worry hour.
Yes, a worry hour. Mm-hmm.
And that helped me so much because I could just do everything I needed to in that moment, scream or jump up and down or cry. And then that's it, put it away and then enjoy my day. So I'm really, really excited to talk to you, to dive into those and to other things that you're going to share with us today. You seem to have so many hats. please tell us which one you are most passionate about. And more specifically, with climate change, do you actually see clients to talk specifically, like one-on-one, about their anxieties dealing with climate change?
Yes, you're right. I sort of have several branches of the ways that I work, but climate change is at the center of it. And some of it is I am licensed as a psychotherapist, so I do see people in my office. And since this is a specialization area that is sometimes hard to find in the mental health world, sometimes people do seek me out specifically for that. You know, terms like eco-anxiety are becoming much more common in the news, in articles, and people are relating to that. So my name will pop up as people search for that. And the other thing I do in my practice is, people generally fill out an intake form, give me a little information about their background, and I have a question in there that says, and when you hear about what's happening in the world, including climate change, how does it affect you? So that even if someone came in to work on something else, it starts to just introduce the possibility that if that is an added area of stress, that it's a welcome area to include. Because we're used to thinking with therapy, with counseling, that we're going to talk only about work stresses or relationship issues or making a big decision or resolving things about how we grew up. But as you've already mentioned, we're so affected by our environment socially and what's happening in the world on all kinds of levels. And it needs to be a part of what's welcomed in a therapeutic conversation.
Absolutely. I'd like to introduce you to our featured goddesses now who are going to join us in this discussion.
It's so nice to meet you, Leslie. And it's funny, I'm reading a book by Glennon Doyle right now, and her daughter is fixated on what's going to happen to the polar bears. And there's a story about the preschool teacher talking about climate change. And then when it's over, all the kids, ran outside and played. And her daughter held on to it for months and kept asking about them. And in the end, Glennon Doyle's like, oh my God, we all should be caring this much. Like she's not just an extra sensitive child, we should all care. Yes. So I think it's such an interesting avenue that you're taking, because it's there in politics, it's there in how we all live our own lives. And it is always in the back of your mind. And with your focus on it, I mean, there's, I'm curious if there's like ways for us to think about our own carbon footprint and what we are ourselves in our own little way doing to the environment. And if there's things that you can do that, like, I don't know, like simple things to do, or just even ways to think about things that you can calm yourself down if you feel that you are like practicing safe measures.
Mm-hmm. I love that story, because I do agree that paying attention to what's happening, COVID, climate change, state of the world, is asking us to look more deeply, to care more deeply, to maybe act and behave in different ways than we are accustomed to. Part of what we all need to do, and I think we'll be talking about this today, is, well, how do we cope and what are some tools? And that's really important. But I don't think we can just go to, ooh, help me feel better. I think it's got to be, let's pay attention. Big things are happening. It's not the way it used to be. While COVID is going to resolve at some point, most likely, we're looking at kind of the state of the world with a lot of ongoing large issues. And so rather than only attending to self-care, I think we do need to be willing to kind of bring up that courage and that vulnerability to say, as you just posed, what can I do? How am I a part of the problem and can be a part of the solution because so much of these issues are woven into just basically every human endeavor. So that's part of the answer to the question of what can I do, is I'm a big believer that climate advocacy or other types of social justice issues are not limited to protests, carrying a sign in the street. That's kind of what comes to mind when you hear about somebody's an advocate. I'm not against that, but my feeling is that the way we're doing business in every front, and how medicine is done, and how education is done, and how business is done, needs to be re-examined through a sustainability lens. So part of that is an invitation that wherever you're working, whatever your involvements, there are ways you can weave conversations, changes, modifying how things are done, reducing waste, whatever it might be, educational programs, and that in a way it makes sense to start within your own sphere of influence. And honestly, even just the willingness to have conversations, to talk about it, to raise the awareness is an important step in the bigger part of supporting necessary change. Does that get to the question you were asking?
It does. No, thank you. That was a beautiful way to say it. Thank you.
Alyssa, along those lines, she has some questions.
Yeah. Hi, Leslie. And in the beginning that you add a question to your sort of intake materials about eco-anxiety, I'm wondering about sort of the differences that you see in sort of the generations and how they are either affected by and feel anxious about climate change, and perhaps even in their level of engagement with the idea of climate change. Especially, our generation didn't really grow up with climate change being part of our everyday conversation. It certainly is now, but it wasn't part of our childhood like it is for millennials, for example. So yes. I'm wondering if you see a real difference in, as I said, sort of the level of anxiety based on, where you fall in the generations.
I absolutely do. That's a really great question. Part of answering this is that I was approached, I guess about a year ago now, by the American Psychological Association's Children's Book Division to write a book for kids from about 10 through middle school on coping with climate change. And this is a publication that does things like, if you have test anxiety, what do you do? Or if you're being bullied at school, what do you do? And they're recognizing just how pervasive this concern is, even among, again, kids as young as 10. And part of it, as you say, is because it's more in the conversation now. People are either directly affected or may know someone who's had to deal with smoke or a fire or a flood or a hurricane or whatever it might be. And as the younger generations are having their eyes open to this and start to look at, well, what really is going on, it's quite scary, because the projections about, unless we make significant change, they're saying, well, this is the world we're inheriting. This is what we're growing into. And questions they have now from, 18 in their 20s and in their 30s, questions like, should I even start a family? Were never questions that were considered before, but they're seriously saying, would I want to bring a child into the world given what they're saying it might be like? Would that be unethical? Would that be unwise?
Camille is now going to get a little political.
Okay.
She volunteered for this question.
I did. I never shy away from a political conversation. So, hi, Leslie. Nice to meet you.
Hi, you too.
So not to get too political, but however, the mask has become a political issue, and so has climate change. And I just wonder, how do we, in like normal, regular conversation, how do we approach it in a way where it doesn't become political? Are there practical things that we can do in everyday with our families, friends, Facebook, whatever things that we can do to
Yes.
help with that. I live in Raleigh, North Carolina, just to give you some context as to why this is important to me.
Yes. Okay. Well, you guys aren't shy about asking the big questions. I wish I wish I had the big answers, but I'm happy to share the ways that I grapple with it. And there may be things that will be useful to others. One of the things I try and do when I am speaking to someone with very different perspectives and points of view is I try and begin by listening. You know, there's this impulse in me to want to set it right and straighten them out. And because after all, you know, open your eyes, you know, these, you know, all the things you hear, these are not opinions, these are facts. But we know from studies in behavioral change and communication that usually just gets others to kick up additional resistance and dig in their heels. So as hard as it can be sometimes, I try to start with listening and believe that somewhere, even with what might be very considerable differences, there may be threads of commonality, like looking for help. You know, if it can't be around climate or masks or something specific, maybe it's related to air pollution in the area or water quality in the area, which has ties to these other bigger issues. And that's one thing that gets so unruly about these topics, and it's kind of a good thing and a hard thing, is they're so interconnected. They're so, you know, our beliefs, our actions, our empathy or lack of empathy, our ambivalence about changing our life, because we might even see things that we believe would be beneficial, but it might require that we sacrifice things we really want. So anyway, I try and start by listening. I try and start to keep my antenna up for common ground. And even if it isn't the, you know, the big picture of getting more aligned in points of view, it might be a starting place where instead of being kind of oppositional, we can face the same way and combine some efforts. The other thing I'll say in general about so much division and different points of view, this isn't a precise ratio, but it's helpful to think of it this way. I sometimes think of the whole being made up of thirds. So a third of the people saying, oh, I view it the way you do. You know, I follow science. I think this is really important. On the far end, the other third is maybe what I call Teflon mind. Nothing will stick. You know, it doesn't matter what you say, it's going to bounce off. But the middle third is where I think fruitful change is really possible, because I put in that middle third people who might not know a lot about it, people who might be skeptical but are curious or willing to read an article or willing to hear another point of view. And so that middle third is really fruitful ground, because if the conversation's there or the ways of working together can really be aligned, then we've got a 2/3 majority, right? But if we don't, then it could tip the other way. So rather than trying to, you know, convince someone or debate someone who's really got strong points of view, I look for the openings where there's just a little more movement, there's just a little more fluidity and flexibility, possibility.
That actually leads into Joelle's question.
Okay, great. It's really connected. And so you mentioned in the introduction with COVID and everything else, the struggle people have with isolation and loneliness. And there's certainly truth there that we could talk about. But there's another level entirely where we are and always have been and always will be connected. And there's something useful about trying to keep that in our awareness. So that's one thought. The other one is, and this was coming to me when I was hearing about trauma and trauma theory, the trauma soup we're all in. It's a concept called the window of tolerance or the zone of resilience. And the way it's normally conceptualized, I don't know if you can see my hands here, but there's kind of this place in which we operate, and we have ups and we have downs, but they're not too extreme, and we can function pretty well. When there's too much on our plate, or the situation feels too big, and we go outside our window of tolerance, we either lash out and get angry and get reactive, and we lose our ability to kind of reason through things, or we kind of check out and dissociate and drop out. And so it's good to understand where our edges are, but the point I really want to make today is we can learn to stretch our window of tolerance. And given how big things are in the world, I think that's a task we all need to undertake, is stretching our capacity to bear witness to more. I think we have that ability to be more resilient than we may even realize or believe. And the how-to of that is really, it's really varied. It's everything from really practical stuff like a good sleep habit and eating well and exercising and all those things that you might think of. But then beyond that, it gets kind of personal, kind of individual. Like, what are the things that bring you joy? Not all of them are available during times of COVID, but many, many are. Like for me, I love dancing, and I'm used to do partner dancing, except that now that's not an option. But one interesting thing about COVID is that I'm taking tap dancing classes in my living room being broadcast out of New York. Great, studio in New York, that being in the state of Washington, I wouldn't have had access to. So some things are closing down, other things are opening up. Are we paying attention to and really utilizing those other opportunities? So taking a really good inventory, what can stretch your window of tolerance? And honestly, some of it is just practicing and willing to be uncomfortable. When things are hard, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad. It may be our stretch zone. It may be that we're considering things in a new way, or we're being asked to step up in ways that we haven't before. Maybe if you're kind of more quiet and introverted, the idea of speaking out on climate change or some other issue is really challenging. Or maybe if you're good at talking, the idea of starting with listening is really challenging. But it's like, where can we go from our comfort zone to our stretch zone without going into our panic zone? But feeling a willingness, maybe even a commitment to explore a stretch zone so that we can be present with open heart, stay present with things that are challenging. This is an ordeal. It's a difficult time. I don't want to minimize that. But I do think it's worth considering taking the challenge of, well, then what else is in me if I reach a little more deeply, or if I put my values to the test in ways I haven't before, or if I follow through on things I've thought about doing but haven't gotten around to yet. This is the time. This is a great time to consider doing that. Yes, it's a tough one. Again, I wish there were a simple answer to this, because people are fatigued at navigating all the COVID restrictions. And there's been this little tease, right, where things are opening up a little. No, they're not. And we get tired of that. And it requires, again, that we dig a little more deeply. The other thing that, and I'll try and come up with some more practical things as well. The other thing that's sort of a paradox to this that I want to include is, when it feels like you're low and you just really even can't even engage the things that you know are your more joyful or more resiliency practices. It may be that you're being asked to spend a little time grieving. We're in a time of loss, you know, and on a personal level, on all kinds of levels. And on a personal level, it is not being able to do some of the things that are really valuable, healthy, and essential to us, like spending time with friends. We're social creatures, however introverted or extroverted we are by nature. And so grief is a good thing in that if this is a situation and we're facing it head on, not only are we going to look for creative outlets and creative things to do and new ways of connecting, but there are things that just are going to remain unavailable for a while that are hard. And sometimes if we take the time to feel that, to acknowledge it, to journal, if you like to write, to scribble or collage, if you like to express creatively, to talk it out with a friend, whatever it may be, and just not always feel like you have to kind of bump yourself up into a happy moment. It actually clears some of that energy out, and there can be a more natural sense of flow to our feelings. Because if that's what's truly going on, there needs to be a little bit of room for that too. We certainly don't want it to predominate, but it's in the mix right now.
It's true, because there's even some things that we will no longer most likely ever get to do again. I mean, to the capacity that we used to. Mm-hmm. Maybe. What do you guys think?
I thought it was interesting that you were talking about grief. And, I started thinking like maybe one day, like there are these stages of grief. We'll look back, the historians will write about the stages of COVID, right? Where we were, we can do this. We all went into this, baking and doing jigsaw puzzles and doing everything that we do. And then this fatigue set in, and now we're kind of frustrated and even anxious and angry. And I think there are these stages that we're all experiencing sort of, globally and, in our own sort of households. And I think one thing that has been a problem throughout is this lack of connection to the same extent that we've been able to, do so before. Certainly we have Zoom and we have computers and everything, but I think that's leading to so much anxiety. I'm sure that's what you hear a lot in your practice. But I also think that it's caused us to think about, and I'd love your thoughts on this, where we can gain back some control. Right? You were talking about stretching our resilience, but maybe we think about it in terms of what can and what can't we control, right? We're not personally responsible for a vaccine, and we can't do anything, but we can wear a mask and we can go out and sort of do our part. And we don't put those masks on the ground that I see as I'm walking every day, because that's just not right. In so many different ways. But, so I wonder if that's something, if that's a tool, that we can think about adding to sort of our own toolboxes of, think about the ways that we can still have some control over our lives, even at a time when so much seems to have been taken out of our control.
Yes, honestly, I think that's always a good thing to sift through. What can I do? What can I control? All right, let me make sure I'm actually following through on those things. And what can't I, and how can I let go of that? I mean, that's, just sort of a fundamental, great thing to consider. And I really like what you're saying about the stages of grief, because it makes me think, as you were saying that, I think there's a lot of bargaining that's been going on. All right, I'll wear a mask for 6 months, but that's it. That's, if I do this, then I want this, but that we're being tested beyond those limits at this point.
Right.
Yeah.
I think we do find opportunities to control our own situation, whether, it's what we do for the environment, who we put into elected office. Those are things we can, we can help control. And it's, I think, what we're trying to do to sort of gain back what we think we've lost.
Yes. And, on a personal level, with this time of more isolation, I really have found a few bright spots that have come in. For example, old friends that I haven't connected to in a long time have reached out and have kind of reconnected because of this, everyone trying to find ways, right, to build up our networks. And one of the things, I've never really enjoyed cooking that much, but now that I don't go out to dinner, I've actually done baking and things in the kitchen, and I've sort of discovered these new fun things. I'm not sure if they'll last beyond COVID or not, but it's kind of been fun. I do a lot of writing, and I've actually really appreciated this little bit of, time that's carved out because I'm just here. So I've actually been able to use that really well. And again, it's going to be different for everybody, but without trying to sugarcoat anything at all, I think it is like a little bit of a treasure hunt. What's available to me now that wasn't before? How many times have I said I've wanted to do X, Y, or Z, and maybe there's a chance now.
Does anyone have any other questions for Leslie regarding either climate change or isolation or anything along those lines? Or
I do, only because I have a younger child, and I think about this for even with teenagers. And when you brought up the whole idea that you're grieving also all the things you can't do, how do we talk to our kids about who we're looking forward to different life events like graduations, proms, dating, all those things they can't do, and try to explain, like you said, finding those treasure hunts, I guess, for other ways they can find ways to connect on that level. Although I'm not wanting my daughter to date anytime soon. She's only 12, but I mean, it's still like thinking ahead, like it's inevitable. I can't stop a train from coming, but how do I help buffer it in a way that it's something to look forward to, these new ways they're going to have to do it?
Yeah. Well, I'll answer that, and I want to pair it with something I said, that's relevant to us too, is the kids are going to be right now feeling their own frustration, right, and their own losses and their own discouragement. So it's really important that they know that they can say any of those things too. We do want to still look for, well, what can we do? But we don't want to try and jump over that part because it sort of festers and doesn't go away. And I know we sometimes are afraid that if we make too big of a space for that, it kind of takes over, but it usually is the opposite. It's like if a person is seen and validated and heard and empathized with, it actually kind of relieves some of that. So to not skip that step. And then, to the extent it's possible to maybe even brainstorm with them, creative ideas, because when something is possible that comes out of kids, I'd like to do this, I'd like to try this, it's always, stronger than what we might be introducing if it's reasonable. Yeah, I don't know if I have too much more besides that, because it's that dilemma of, on the one hand, again, like you said, looking for creative options and acknowledging it's really not the way we would prefer it to be. And that's really true too.
I think also, just to add to that, and I know Rachel and Alyssa also had kids who graduated during this time, and it was changed. I know for my daughter, she graduated high school, and it was sad that it wasn't going to be that typical graduation, but it actually was better because I have two older children who graduated the traditional American way. And my daughter's graduation was more personalized. It was just her walking in the auditorium with us, being on stage, getting her diploma. We didn't have to find parking. Maybe it was better for us. We didn't have to get that first row seats. She had a song playing that was her own very own song. We went and had lunch in her backyard. Sure, it would have been great to have a handful of friends, but she did have two of her best girlfriends, and that was really, she said afterwards, all that she really wanted. Now, yes, she missed prom and all of those other things, but when we look back at that actual graduation, we all felt like it was such a special way, and it's a new way, right? That's what I mean. A lot of things are going to have to change and perhaps be the new normal of how to do things. I mean, Rachel, I remember you were saying you felt so sad and you were grieving for your sons also missing out on graduation, right? But did you find that you liked how it was, or the opposite?
So truth be told, I didn't have a child graduating last.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were just sad about the whole, yeah. Okay.
I did have an 8th grader. I keep forgetting he had graduation.
Yeah, I thought you did.
I think about those poor high school.
Is that the third child? The third child, right? Okay.
But Alyssa, you had a college student graduate.
Yeah, Joelle did too. They're actually they've known each other a very long.
Oh, that's right. I'm sorry. That's right. Yeah, they all graduated.
That was hard. I mean, but look, we're all experiencing loss and grieving the loss of some big life event. I missed my niece's wedding, which was out of state, and my son didn't graduate. Didn't have this big graduation processional for college and with us snapping pictures from this, but it's no different than I think we could all point to something or multiple things that we really did miss out on. And I don't know, I think I'm thinking sort of down the road and how we'll all look back on this. That seems to be sort of that's going through my brain right now. But I think hopefully, like Karen was saying, they'll look back and say, well, that was certainly, it's like one for the history books, right? Will be that generation or that college graduate, the class of 2020, that really missed out. I sure hope class of 2021 gets to graduate in some kind of normal fashion. But I think we all sort of felt that loss, and now we're kind of thinking, okay, let's just get done with this.
And also, kind of to piggyback on that, I think that as hard as it was to sit with my daughter having that big disappointment, and it was a really big disappointment, something that we've been planning and talking about for so long, her college graduation and who are we going to get together with, who are we going to celebrate with, on and on. As hard as that was, it was also such an opportunity for building resilience, for stretching that window of tolerance and learning that the world, as much as you plan and as much as you create expectations, sometimes it works out just the way that you planned it. And sometimes, guess what? We have to pivot. We have to go back to the drawing board, and those are hard lessons, but sometimes when you learn them early, even though they're painful, they kind of gird you for what's to come in life, and we never know what's coming around the corner.
I'd love to just underscore that a little bit too, is, I do think there's this natural thing as parents in our, DNA where we want to protect our kids and give them the best and keep them from out of harm's way. But there are some cultures that intentionally introduce, through a rite of passage around adolescence, introduce them to hardship as a way of doing just what you're describing. It's the chance to have to navigate an ordeal for what it teaches, for how it helps us mature and grow up, for what they can learn from it. And it's actually, lovingly and intentionally imposed. So this week all got sort of a dose of it without asking for it. But very much along the lines that you've said, not only is that possible, there are some places that design it that way.
Can I talk about this idea that my husband and I have had, we go walking every morning. We've been doing it since we started quarantining. And it's this notion, like in Israel, when you graduate from high school, there's 2 years required in the Israeli army. And if the United States, especially during this period of COVID and craziness, it's too soon to implement. But I think it would be so beneficial for there to be a program for American students when they graduate high school of a Peace Corps program, and whether it's in the United States or in other countries, but it's a 1 year commitment of students, and you again, it's like incorporating this hardship, like viewing hardship, serving others, serving a national good. I just think that could be like an amazing change to American society.
It could be called 2020 Camp.
It's a great idea.
It is a great idea. I also know that I've heard from friends who have younger children that would go away to sleepaway camp and how sad they were. But then at the end of the summer, the parents were telling me that actually it was the best summer of their children's lives because they played in the backyard, they played on the street. They didn't have to have a programmed activity. So it's kind of like the way you look at things, right? If you can just twist your way of thinking a little bit and look at it through a different lens, that could help too. Leslie, are there any other thoughts you could share with us on what we're going through right now and some things that we could do? I know you said some great things in the talk in March. Is there anything else you can share?
Well, one thing I just want to put out in terms of, emotional support resources is, especially as it comes to climate change, since that's my primary one, but again, the principles would apply to other things. There's a great organization called the Good Grief Network, and I believe all their gatherings, which are of course online now, are free, and they have a lot of online resources too, but it's a comfortable, open environment to just bring these concerns with other people who are sharing the same thing. Similar to that, there's something called the Climate Psychology Alliance, which has talks and resources. They do something called a Climate Cafe with a similar idea, just, if this is on your mind, this is a way to talk with like-minded people. But they also have, for people who would want something like actual counseling or therapy support, they are creating a directory of what are being called climate-aware therapists. And one reason that's important is that, like all human endeavors, not all of the mental health field is fully on board with this. And if you're bringing these concerns to someone less aware of the bigger picture, it can be sort of pathologizing, or they think you're exaggerating, or you're just not going to quite get that empathy and support that you're after in facing it from the way you understand it. So that's also just a great resource to know about as well.
No, those are excellent. We'll have those on our website as well for anyone who is interested. We'd like to thank you so much for helping to educate us and talk with us about self-care, as well as our care for our planet, for our world, because they're all interconnected. And we look forward to speaking with you again sometime soon. Perhaps we can all gather in Chicago or Washington or North Carolina. And thank you so much for joining us on Grateful Goddesses today.
Thank you. Yes, I'd love to reconvene.
Up next, favorite things. Opening up to happiness and joy.
So here we are at favorite things. And as we talked about with our guest, Leslie Davenport, she talked about finding things of joy and things that make us happy. And those are ways that we can control our situations, because we know what we love. And even if there's something that we don't love, we can turn it around. We can see the silver linings. We can see the happiness and joy from it. So this is our adult show and tell, where we get to share some of our favorite rituals or objects or products. So I will start. This is a tea called Just Relax, or Get Relaxed. I think I've had it, so I'm just relaxed. But it's just, I love this tea. There's all different kinds. I don't know if you've seen them. I drink this one to get some Z's. Oops. There to get some Z's. But this one I love. I have this at around 4 o'clock every day. And it's just or I'll interchange with a glass of wine. But it helps me to just stay calm and chill and feel zen, especially when I am feeling anxious for some reason, Leslie, and maybe you can help explain why. Around 3-4 o'clock is when my most anxious time comes. And I'm not really, maybe it's because it all builds and then I let it out at that time. But that's when I have my tea.
Yes, I'll just briefly say, because I don't know a lot of the science, but I know we do have biological rhythms. It's also why a lot of people wake up around 3 in the morning, or 3:30 and have a little trouble getting back to sleep. There are these biorhythms that we have. So it's probably part of that.
Well, it's true. I do wake up at 3 and I'll have some tea and I'll go right back to sleep. It's true. Camille, what did you bring today?
So mine's my shirt because it's my best friend.
Diana Ross.
He's a drag queen. Jeremy Austin, his drag queen is caller 6, but anytime I'm kind of stressed out, and he's been through me some really rough times, and vice versa, and it's just, he's my calming tea, I guess. So he reminds me how to calm down and to think back on good times and how to get over them again. And so it was really hard being hunched down. And then at one point I forgot what I brought. And so that's why I was like hunting around.
And then you're wearing it.
Yep,
you were just so engaged in this conversation. Yeah. That's like when the glasses are on your head, but you're looking all over for them. I know.
That would be me too.
Alyssa, what did you bring today?
Okay, so my calming tea is actually my daily walks. And I know, Rachel, you've talked about this a lot. I actually need to get out and walk every single day, sometimes with my husband, a lot of times just by myself, but not just, any walk, because the neighborhoods around here can be a little crowded and just stressful in traffic. I mean, I'm deep in sort of a big city, so a lakefront walk. So we are very blessed that here in Chicago, we have a beautiful lakefront. This morning, at 7:00 in the morning, it was absolutely beautiful and quiet, and we see the skyline, and just somehow being next to the lake, very near nature, that's not concrete, that's actually real sort of nature, that really has the most calming influence on me. And I try to do it early every day so that it sort of sets my tone for the day, and that I kind of go off and sort of feel like I'm starting the day as zen as I possibly can. So that's my calming tea.
Well, isn't walking too, we learned from another guest, it's meditative, right?
It can be, for me, I feel like, Leslie, I'd love your take on this, but for me, I feel like it's really when I can, think about kind of all things good, bad, and ugly, but sometimes I have music and sometimes I don't. And it's just it's my own form of meditation.
Yeah, two things that come to mind about that is, you're right. We think of stress being in our thoughts, which it is, and in our feelings, which it is, but we're learning that it's our nervous systems that, for example, hold on to trauma and forms of stress. And so the movement actually does do a lot to shift our physiology, which then ripples out to our thoughts and feelings. And the fact that you're orienting to the lake too, this natural body of water, and enjoying the beauty, that also amplifies the benefits. Sometimes I say, get green when you're blue. Like if you're feeling low, but you have a chance to be in a beautiful natural environment, it makes a huge difference.
That's a tweetable quote. I love that. Get green when you're blue. And Alyssa, I'm going to see you tomorrow at 7 a.m. I think I'm going to try that too if you see me walking.
Anytime.
Love it. Rachel, what did you bring today?
Okay, so I just have to comment that this is that same vintage blouse, but it's a rubbed poly chiffon.
Well, just to elaborate, she wore one for the last episode that we did.
Okay. Pink one this morning for an episode, and I'm wearing my green one now.
What is the name of it?
From the 70s. It's made of rubbed poly chiffon, and I don't know if you can see the texture, but it's like all these lines, and it's just it's like funky sleeves.
Fun.
And a fun blouse. I love being able to wear all of my vintage clothes for these things. So this is a gift that I just received from friends that were staying with us in our house, and they were here when Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed away, and I love her, and I have I've already shown on Favorite Things, a little like plastic doll of her, and they gave me this gift, which is just like a little stand, and it's a quote from her. It says, "Fight for the things that you care about, but do it in a way that will lead others to join you." And without even knowing how relevant it would be to our conversation, it's exactly what you were saying. Like, we all have strong opinions, and but we really have to craft them and be able to share them in a way that they're heard. And you talking about listening is what I am trying to work on all of the time. I am happy to share my opinion, and I need to practice listening more, because it really does work and help, and it enables you to craft your argument around what the person is saying. And so that is truly a life lesson for me. And I just love that quote from Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
I love that quote too. It's perfect. Joelle?
Sorry about that sneeze.
No, actually, when you sneeze, as my mother always said, it means it's true. That what the person said is true.
Yeah. So my favorite thing right now is getting back to my books. I think that since the lockdown, I have been so focused on sitting in front of screens, whether it's working, all day, or a good chunk of the evening in front of my computer screen, or zoning out, dissociating in front of the TV screen, or, mindlessly spending all kinds of time in front of my little cell phone screen. I just felt like, what is happening to me? I'm turning to jelly inside my own mind, because I'm either being overstimulated or I'm using it to zone out. And I realized, when's the last time that I did something that helps me to just really come back into myself, and is just calming for me, and always has been. And for me, one of the biggest things is just losing myself in a book, whether it's for 10 minutes or for the whole afternoon with a blanket on the couch. That is so nourishing for me. It always has been, and I neglected it for so long, because I think I was just so wrapped up in trying to adapt and keep myself kind of level in this new situation that we're living in. And so I am just really rediscovering how self-soothing it can be for me to just close the computer, put down the TV clicker, and just sit quietly with myself and my friends in a book, and just come back to myself.
That's a nice size book too.
What book is it? What book is it?
This has been sitting on my bookcase for I don't know how many years. It's Truly Madly Guilty. It's by the author of Big Little Lies, Big Little Lies. Mm-hmm. So this should do me for a little while.
Yeah. Leslie, last but not least, what is one of your favorite things that you'd like to share?
When I was asked that question, I brought a 1/4 pound of wildflower seeds. It kind of goes with our theme of today of seeds, but I've started gardening during this time, and I love that this isn't going to just stay in my hand. It's going to go in the ground. I'm not going to see them for a while. Hopefully they'll be spectacular at certain points. They'll fade, but I really like the just kind of the flow of the whole life cycle. And like I said, that there's such resiliency in plants. If any of you grow flowers or know, like once the blossoms fall off, most of them, if you open the little pod that the blossoms were on, there's probably, 50 seeds from one flower. It's like, how hard does life want to go on? It's like, I'm going to, I'm going to do abundance to make this work. I'm just going to expand. And so I'm excited about this.
I didn't know that about the inside the bud. Did you guys know that? I didn't know that. And I love
that. Like a marigold or a cosmos, if you don't need those kind of flowers. Yeah, just some point when they're dry, just pop them open, you'll see the seeds. Or poppies do that.
Beautiful. Well, thank you for spreading all the seeds of knowledge today, and for joining us on Grateful Goddesses. Thank you so much.
Unleashed your inner goddess yet? Thanks for joining us today on Grateful Goddesses. We invite you to visit our website, www.gratefulgoddesses.com, to access today's show notes as well as other helpful resources. Don't forget to leave a review. Until next time, stay strong and empowered to be a grateful goddess.